Welcome to Standing on the Shoulders of Hobbits. My name is Harry Pettigo.
Father Frank Amberger.
Today we are here for another episode on J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, and we'll be looking at two chapters today, chapters 3 and 4.
Correct. So they're shorter chapters, and we're just gonna, although may not be the podcast is shorter. So kind of drilling in. I mean, if we look at chapter 3, when we last left Bilbo. So they're on the journey. They've had a major, actually, almost a cataclysmic end to the journey, to the mission with the trolls. So they're, physically battered and bruised. I think you could say they've been through the ringer, and definitely it's been rough on them.
Yes, sir.
So Gandalf, as this chapter opens, Gandalf is seeking Rivendell. So find Rivendell, and they spend, I think they said they spend at least 14 days there. So it's a good amount of time, which is interesting because they're really, when they have that unexpected party at Bilbo's Hobbit hole, there's this sense of timeliness, like we got to get this thing moving, and we're leaving tomorrow morning, early-ish. So there's this sense of, I don't want to say urgency, but they're not going to be like, we'll kind of get this thing moving maybe in a couple of days, couple of weeks, something like that. And then they spend, 2 weeks, at Rivendell, which Tolkien says, their clothes were mended, as well as their bruises, their tempers, and their hopes. And once again, this is not something that I'm saying, okay, Tolkien meant this directly, but it's interesting that, at least from my perspective, that they spend this time, and a significant amount of time, of which you don't really hear all the details about it, other than that it's a very wholesome, they're sleeping, they're eating, they're just sort of thinking, pondering, whatever it may be that they're all doing. But it's a restorative rest. It's very much of, they are being sort of made whole again. And I think that when Tolkien points out that, they're I don't know how he would phrase it, but their hopes are mended. So you think, that incident with the trolls really probably, I would say messed them up, but definitely it had some impact. So from that standpoint, and I'm going to kind of just bring in more. Usually I keep like the points to ponder, if you will. As I've always said, I think it's good to have a notebook as you're reading, so you can write down some of these quotes, and then to sort of look and say, okay, what does this mean for me? Because we've talked about this before. Tolkien talked about it, Chesterton, I think C.S. Lewis as well, and probably others. That one of the power, or the positive effect of a fairy tale, or an epic tale, if you want to call it that, is that it kind of acts as that mirror, and allows the individual reading to be able to see themselves in a different light, for Tolkien, this isn't the case for every fairy tale out there, so can't always do this for everything, I guess. But Tolkien, because of his I would say rock solid Catholic understanding of the world, so you can look at this and say, what does this mean for me? So if we look at this, and like I said, I'm not saying that Tolkien intended this to, the point that I'm making here, he's like, it's exactly why I put it there. He might have put it there for various other reasons. But I think because of this, you can kind of look into this. And so my sort of question or point to ponder, so the rest that Bilbo and the dwarves experience is definitely very fulfilling, it's very wholesome, it's very restorative, okay? And if you look at a lot, of the forms of rest, and I'll put air quotes on that we experience in today's culture, a lot of times it's not really doesn't have a restorative effect necessarily. It's more of a distractive effect. I mean, I think of like not going harsh on video games. I don't know if you want to play video games, that's fine. But video games isn't really like, okay, my mind, my body, and my soul are now restored.
You don't get the impression that Elrond had a video gaming state-of-the-art console there.
Pretty sure, and like I said, distractions are fine to a certain degree. If something's wholesome, that's fine, But when we look at, to me, the fact that they stayed so long, and I can't help, I remember a story that my mom told me, well, not so much a story, but more of a comment about her father. So her father, my grandfather, would go on, which was not uncommon this is probably back in the 40s and the 50s, he would go on a retreat. And so they would have, Catholic, this was a Jesuit retreat at the Milford Center over in Milford, Ohio. So it's called the Men of Milford. And so they would have a weekly, probably a Monday through Friday, I would imagine, retreat that they would do on an annual basis. I should say like a weekly, but this was a
long period.
So,
Yes, sir.
and my mom said that, so her mother, my grandmother, would say how refreshed he came back, so renewed. And it wasn't because, so that's the kind of renewal that I'm thinking of, that restoration. My grandfather ran his own business, stressed, was an electrician, yada, yada, yada. But this was something that was very restorative for him. So I think it's important for us, that we, because people live extremely busy lives, and I think really in some respects too much so. So do we take the time to rest? Sometimes for some people, rest is like, oh, I can't do that. I don't have, and I realize for some people that's very, very difficult because of so many things they're juggling. But we need rest because we are battered in many ways, as the Hobbits or the Bilbo and the dwarves were. So do we take rest? Okay, but in that rest, okay, are we actually taking rest that actually ends up restoring or helping restore our mind and our body and our soul? Or is the rest that we kind of gravitate towards, a lot of times people are just like, end of the day, I gotta, decompress, unwind, just gonna watch TV. Nothing bad about that. It's not like, oh, we're surely on the path to hell now. But from the standpoint, is that always going to be the restorative type of rest that we need?
Your comment reminded me that how we sometimes can confuse distraction and rest, and I think that with the idea of there was a journey ahead of these dwarves and the Hobbit and Gandalf, and the journey is always at the focus. It's always the focal point.
Exactly. And so you're not just like, hey, can I have a few moments or some time to distract me from the journey? They're not right, because you might think, come on, guys, we got to move this. Let's get this thing moving. And interesting enough, we're not talking about the Lord of the Rings, but Tolkien also used the same, when they were in Rivendell again and in Lothlorien, there is a healing, restorative power of being in that period of rest. Mm-hmm. And so, like to your point, resting is not just distracting you from the mission but it's really helping you. How can I engage more deeply in the mission that's in front of me, knowing that we need that. So, like I said, I don't want to make more of that. I have no idea if that's what Tolkien. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know really the details of Tolkien's personal sort of spiritual life, but it wouldn't surprise me if he, because that was, I would say not maybe commonplace, but that was somewhat standard, that the lay faithful would take time on an annual basis to go on retreat, a spiritual retreat. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm not saying that that's what Tolkien meant. When I'm looking in this mirror, that's what I saw and thinking, oh yeah, I got to really focus. And, we could, like I said, make more of it. But to me, for us to ponder, all of us, ourselves personally, how diligent am I in taking that rest? In rest that actually is going to restore me or help bring about a restoration. So, one aspect.
Do you think, Father, and this might tie into some other thoughts on their time in Rivendell, but it's interesting to me too that the hobbits, or the Hobbit and the dwarves, they rest not with their current company. They don't rest in isolation, but they actually are enriched by the company in which they, have their
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Which, sorry, I thought, gotta make. So if someone's reading The Hobbit, the way the elves are quite often portrayed in The Hobbit is different than they're a little bit more, I guess, whimsical. And I think as Tolkien, as this legendarium kind of progressed in his mind, the elves, there was almost maybe a sense of nobility, maybe, or I don't want to say necessarily seriousness, because that makes them sound like just a bunch of, stick in the mud kind of, but there's something that, anyway, so the elves that we meet here, but interesting enough, there is that whimsical, you would think that rest is not just, okay, we're all going to sit around and we're just going to be real serious, we're going to read real serious things. I mean, they're I don't want to say they're cracking jokes, but there's a joy, there's almost a bubbling forth of joy in the elves that at least we meet in The Hobbit in many ways. So just want to throw that in there because I think sometimes you think, oh, this is not, especially if you've ever read any of the Lord of the Rings, you think, well, something's sort of not matching here is they're not the same type of elves, if you will. I'm not saying they're not the same, but anyway, you get off that topic because I'll fall off the edge.
Well, I was curious, Elrond does play a significant role in this chapter. I think you had a point that you wanted to speak to.
Absolutely. So, which is interesting because you think, well, why are they waiting so long there?
Right.
There are things, and they're not saying, well, we have to wait this long. So Elrond, I guess I'll back the truck up a little bit. Elrond, just by, someone cynically might say, just by chance, as he's looking at the map, and it's just happens to be in, that, I would say, late evening, the moon, I think he says, the crescent moon, the same day, the same season as the moon letters were written, happens. There's just so many things like, well, they happen to just be showing in the map at that day when the moon was in the sky, and he happened just to kind of, I don't know if he was looking for something or just kind of happened to kind of put it up with the moon shining. And moon letters can only be read in a certain way. I think Tolkien talks about that.
Yes, sir. He says, moon letters are rune letters, but you cannot see them, said Elrond. Not when you look straight at them. They can only be seen when the moon shines behind them. And what is more, with the more cunning sort, it must be a moon of the same shape and season as the day when they were written.
Which, the likelihood of all of these factors coming into play at that exact moment is just stunningly almost impossible.
Oh, yeah.
And so and I do think that Tolkien is intending this to, I would say, surprise the reader, but at least to catch the reader's attention and thinking, oh, what in the world? How did this all kind of mesh together? And there would be those who would say, that was just by chance. That was just a coincidence. Tolkien will start using the word, I think it's in chapter I think.
It is too. Yes, sir.
When he'll start using the word luck. I mean, I guess he's used it maybe a little bit, maybe before, but to me, this is where Tolkien is going sort of gently, not overtly, like, here, this is what I'm, but he's going to start sort of his exposition, if you will, what we would say on God's divine providence.
Yes, sir.
That God actually has a plan which is unfolding in real time, and we are participating in that plan. Because otherwise, how in the world could that possibly all, and just, it had to be that night of that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So to me, that is, there's no, Tolkien is not insisting by trying to write, as you can see, there was no way, but you think, I just don't, maybe it could be a coincidence.
It points towards divine design and providence.
Exactly. So, and from that standpoint, and I'm just going to, like I said, usually, or at least in the other podcasts, I've just said, okay, at the end, I've kind of done my sort of spiritual application questions, if you will.
Sure.
I don't know, I did it for the point before, maybe I'll just kind of run into, at this junction. Pope John Paul II famously said that something, this is a paraphrase, that in God's divine providence, there's no such thing as coincidence. I think we're all, many times I think we are, honestly, comfortable with or used to just thinking, wow, that was a coincidence. But if you really take Pope John Paul II at his, literally what he's saying, there is no coincidence. It's not that, it's not that God said, oh, that worked out well. I mean, if you think about it, if any detail is truly a coincidence, not only would it surprise us, but it would be, in a sense, surprising to be like, oh, that worked out well. Which is impossible. Right. So that everything is planned. Now, we're going to see this roll out a lot more, and it's going to, carry through, because I think it's one of Tolkien's significant themes throughout his writing, which is it's a beautiful thing, because a lot of times, I don't know if we always focus on that. I think sometimes we focus on God's plan when, dare I say, when our plan doesn't seem to have worked out too well, or I don't really know what to do here, so God, do you have a plan?
Or to your point, when things are going just perfectly your way, it's easy to say, oh, goodness, this is just what divine providence,
Yes. Or even sometimes I think we, unfortunately, even fail to reference God, that because, I think it's going out pretty well. So I think we need to look at it in our lives and say, okay, do we fall prey to that temptation? Either to oftentimes maybe forget any kind of referencing to say, well, hey, what could God, things are going well. Well, is this what God wants? So I guess I should just kind of write or read sort of my points, so people are like, wait, what am I supposed to think about? So what areas, I guess I have a 2-point kind of aspect here. So what areas of my life do I need a more pronounced sense of God's providence? Sort of as a point of reference, what areas, especially, do I have like anxiety about? What areas am I maybe frustrated, discouraged? I don't know what to do. So what areas of my life do I need to really kind of have a more pronounced sense that God does have a plan? But as well, kind of what we were talking about before, do I only allow God to guide the areas that I cannot figure out on my own? So just, once again, to me, this is taking Tolkien's works, and I think it's pretty accurate to say he does intend to really show forth the beautiful and yet very mysterious moving of God's, providential plan throughout the characters that we're reading about. And I'm sure he would want us to not just say, well, that's neat, but to actually then say, well, what about me? Because, once again, Tolkien was very much recognizing the reality of that sort of mirror, if you will, of the epic tale. Okay, so from that standpoint, now what they find out from the map, which I think is kind of curious, it's so these moon letters are really adding to the additional, right? They knew there was the map side entrance. Okay, that gives them a sense of hope. Okay, we got something concrete to work with. Got a side entrance. Okay, I think it's in chapter 1. The Gandalf says, "I also have a key from your father, Thorin." Great. Okay, sure. I guess we're gonna look for a lock. And so you think, oh, hey, we have even more information. So the moon letters, the code, if you will, I guess, stand by the gray stone when the thrush knocks and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole. As descriptive as that is, I think, well, what gray stone? It's a mountain. I bet you there are lots of gray stones. And so the gray stone, the thrush, knocking on what? And the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon it. You think, and actually Thorin comments, he says, this will not help us much, I fear.
Is that what he says?
Yeah, for it passes our skills in these days to guess when such a time will come again. They knew it meant, Durin's day, they knew what that was. It's like I can't remember how they described it exactly. They knew what it was, but he's like, we can't.
How do we calculate?
How are we going to know? And it sounds like you've got just a very narrow window. Yeah. So even though you think, well, this was incredible. All these things came together. We discovered, the moon letters, and now we have this sort of inside view, because clearly the fact that they were written in moon letters, they were supposed to be hidden. So it's almost as if, hey, I bank at whatever, Fifth Third. This is the secret password to my account. I mean, that's the in. That's the in into the sort of, your account, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, how do we even? So when I read that, I think, oh my heavens. Well, once again, I don't know if Tolkien intends this, but as I'm looking in this mirror, I think in my own life, sometimes I really don't understand what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah.
How am I supposed to move forward?
Wow. It's funny you mentioned this, because I'm actually reading this currently with our 7th grade students, and we just finished reading the chapter, and this is no spoilers, but this is not a spoiler. They obviously get to the mountain, and they're going to have to try to figure out what this cryptic message means. And your comments, Father, I don't know, in some ways made me think that despite these bits of clarification that they get along the way, it was just point them in the right direction. I don't know, thinking about when Bilbo does figure out the lock, it was almost as if he were to find that regardless of how cryptic the message was, perhaps even if he hadn't, I don't know, gained any insight from, the moon letters. It almost was, this is going to take place. They were going to find the door. Mm-hmm. Divine providence again, perhaps, I don't know.
Right, and I think that because what Gandalf, which I think is this would be one of the phrases, or I don't know, it's a very short, it's like, I think 5 words, which I think is a beautiful, descriptive, not just reference to hope. And I know Tolkien
Ah.
was very, somewhere I was reading in some of my odd research, that Tolkien very much was very desirous of really conveying that sense of hope, a true sense of hope, and because that's why so what Gandalf says, so here's the clue. All right, well, it's helpful, but it's almost frustrating, because how can we find this? And when Thorin says, I don't think it's going to do us much good, Gandalf says beautifully, that remains to be seen. And I love this because it's what I would say beautifully realistic, but it's filled with hope. I mean, it's realistic to say, I don't know. I mean, I think we can tend to fall into one or the other extreme. One extreme, which honestly I think I would tend to fall into more often, would be, I don't really think this is going to work. I don't think what are we going to do with this information? I mean, I guess that's helpful to have. I don't know. This is not looking so good.
Realism, right?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe a bit of that pessimistic realism, which maybe isn't really realism then. But the other extreme, which I think sometimes people, which probably annoys people like me, is like, oh no, it's going to be fine. Oh yeah, we'll get this. That's no problem. This is good. This is great. Yeah, we're all right. We're totally based on what? This is one of the reasons I love this comment or this analysis of Gandalf, because he, in a sense, is saying things have not yet come to pass. It's realistic, and as he says, that remains to be seen. We don't know how this will sort of unfold. Hope, let's say authentic hope, always, in a sense, holds out that, and I think when you to have authentic hope, this is not me being a theologian or anything, which I'm not, but to have authentic hope, I think you have to have a sense that there is a plan that's bigger than just yours, or it's more than just a bunch of coincidences maybe coming together. It's not just very variable kind of situations that happen to, it's like a bunch of atoms that just kind of bounce around and hit each other, and maybe you get this, but maybe you get that, where if you think, well, no, there's actually a hand guiding this. You could realistically say, I don't know. I mean, if we would sort of put more of a Catholic spin on this, say, if say, for example, you were Thorin and said, well, what good is that going to do? If I were Gandalf, I'd say, well, we don't know what God intends here. We don't know how God will let this all unfold. It is yet to come. We don't know. We do know that he is guiding this, but we don't know how. So for me to say, well, you're right, I don't think we can do anything, I think that's shortchanging God's divine providence. But I think if we say, it'll be fine, we'll get there, no problem, we got this thing covered, it's almost presuming that, well, I know exactly how God's going to unfold this. And so that's why I think it's particularly beautiful. That remains to be seen. It's not unrealistic to say, oh, yeah, no problem, we'll nail this one. It's that realistic sense that things are yet to unfold. And we have to be, it unfolds in sort of real time. It's very interesting when we talk about God's eternal existence. There is no past and there is no future with God, because he lives, or he is, that eternal now. And so, like I said, I don't want to make more of it, but I think it's a beautiful, as Gandalf says, that remains to be seen. We don't know because we're not there yet. We're not in that present moment of where God will act. Now, granted, I'm putting a lot of Catholic thought or a lot of wording, but I think that is because one of the things that I think, and the next chapter has, I think, once again, another particularly beautiful, very poignant, very powerful, not just image of hope, but message of hope. I think it's one of the things that we all struggle with, and I think it's one of the things that we radically struggle with the culture. And I'm not going to get too far on this, but we don't really have hope. We are losing, or we don't have hope. And a lot of that has to do because we have put ourselves in, well, to use modern jargon, into the driver's seat. And so here we go. I mean, but I think even just with the turmoil in people's lives, I mean, we've talked before just in teaching young people, how many young people are coming from rough situations. We're not talking about, hey, oh yeah, your father's in the Mexican drug cartel. I mean, we're just talking about, just things that are very commonplace, broken families, etc., where I don't think we're big on hope in our culture. I don't think we have a whole lot of it, it seems. And I think we all struggle with it to a greater or lesser degree, but I think it's one of the antidotes to the malaise of the culture, but just the anxiety. I mean, you see that in the faces and the just. I mean, so many young people that should just have that. Really, as we've said, that childlike joy and peace, and you think, my goodness, I always screwed up. What is that
PTSD.
Yeah, you think these. So, and I think hope really beautifully orients us to a healing of that.
To your point, Father, I just thought of this, it's interesting. You and I do a lot of talking outside of the podcast about Tolkien and his works, and, trying to recognize, okay, what quantifiably is, or tangibly is different about Tolkien than other writers. And on the topic of hope, that is kind of unique, that hope is coming from somewhere other than the individual. I think a lot of fiction and a lot of storytelling, I guess we can't rag on Harry Potter today because we did it last episode. We'll rag on something else. I don't know. Another story where hope is it's not because of, I don't know, look at the story of, the Iliad, right? Hope doesn't come from, somewhere transcendent, somewhere out of this world, because the gods in the Iliad are very intertwined with the physical world. It's like hope comes from, Achilles, he's the bringer, he's the source of hope. And that can perpetuate a false sense of hope in oneself. I guess that's not to say you should say, I just don't know. I guess I'll just see what happens. I can't do anything. But, I don't know. This does point to a different kind of hope.
And that's an excellent point. And God's divine providence, excuse me, is not, would you just get out of the way? I'll take care of this. It's very much, this is why I think it's so beautiful when Gandalf says, sorry, you think 5 words, I can remember 5 words, but I can't. That remains to be seen. Why does it remain to be seen? Because the protagonists of the story are it's not just, well, if we're going to use it in a Catholic sense, it's not just God sort of like, okay, come on. It's the dwarves and Bilbo, they're actually participating in this. So and God's providence is eminently mysterious. It's not just, it's not 1 or 2 or 3, even 3-dimensional. Well, I'm getting into math and I can't figure it out. But I mean, there is, it's not, to your point, it's not just someone saying, well, I can't do anything. You've lost hope. But hope is not, well, I'm going to do it all myself. You don't have hope. I don't know what you got in there. But it's, well, we're going to move forward, and we're going to see how is God guiding all of this. But we're going to have to make decisions, and proper decisions. And kind of coming back to where we started with today's podcast in the beginning of the chapter is, that stay at Rivendell, it really helped restore their hope, which I can't help but, think that Tolkien, their bruises, their tempers, their clothing, and their hope. It wasn't, I think he is trying to really weave that through.
Well said.
So my if you're the point or to ponder, if you will,
yes,
is
sir.
how realistic is my hope? In the sense, am I the type of person that just says, well, I don't think this is going to work? Which sometimes you think, I don't think pouring water on your engine is going to make it go anywhere. That's realism,
Right.
But to say, well, we're doomed. Yep, it's all downhill. So how realistic is my hope? Or do I go sometimes to the other extreme and just say, oh, it's all going to work out fine. Your house burned down last night. Oh, it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. That's, So, and do I fall into either sort of extreme, if you will? Which to me, in some respects, we probably all do.
So how realistic is my hope, and do I fall into a particular extreme in my lack thereof?
Right.
Is that right?
So the extreme that I will more often than not fall into is like, well, I'm not sure if this is going to work, And there are variations on the theme, and I'm not going to go to confession, but I think it's good for us, once again, we're using Tolkien's idea and others, that this epic tale is helping us see ourselves differently, which requires some of that reflection. So,
Yes, sir.
The next chapter, although not till the very end, I think has a marvelous description, I guess, if you will. But I think as a part of hope, we have to say, okay, do we know where to go? To your point, we can't just sit there and just say, well, guess we're just going to sit here until something happens. So when they leave Rivendell, this is the beginning of chapter 4, Tolkien has a beautiful paragraph. I don't know if he intended this to mean what I'm picking out of it. Once again, I'm kind of looking at the mirror, seeing myself and thinking, oh, this is rather, what would you say, rich in its description. I don't know if you have that first, it's the very first paragraph in chapter 4 there.
On the nature of the journey?
Yes.
How difficult it is? Is that right? The very first paragraph.
Yes.
There are many paths that led up into those mountains and many passes over them. But most of the paths were cheats and deceptions and led nowhere or to bad ends. And most of the passes were infested by evil things and dreadful dangers. The dwarves and the Hobbit, helped by the wise advice of Elrond and the knowledge and memory of Gandalf, took the right road to the right pass.
And once again, it's a very, what would you say, a very, what's a literary term? It's a very rich description, instead of just saying, well, they consulted with Elrond, and with Gandalf's advice, they found the right path. So it's a very beautiful way to phrase it. Now, I don't know if Tolkien intended the reader to pull out what I am sort of seeing, but it's interesting. It's crucial to find the right road to the pass, or I should say the right road to the right pass, as Tolkien would say. And so when he says, there's many paths that led up in those ways, lots of ways you could walk in life, but an awful lot of them are dead ends, or they lead to really crazy danger. There are lots of different ways you can sort of say, well, I'm living this kind of life.
Right.
Well, are you on the right path? Or so having that sense of, we have to get, this is like, people nowadays people don't use map and compass, they just plug it into their phone. Well, everybody does that. Why? Because everybody wants to get to the right place. I mean, nobody likes to be lost. And so we have this innate sense or desire, I guess, to be, if I want to get to point A, I don't want to get to point Z, and so that sense of that right road. Now, in the next paragraph, I think it is, he has, once again, a very descriptive way of telling, well, they were on the right path to the right paths. He says, it was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way, and a lonely and a long. Now, I'm not a linguist, and I'm not a literature. I'm not sure. I would have been and a lonely one and a long one, but I'm sure Tolkien knows a lot more than I do. But it's just interesting. He just says, and a lonely and a long. But when I look at that, it was a hard path and a dangerous path and a crooked way and a lonely and a long. So those 5 descriptive words really, we being on the right path, being on the path to, growing in holiness, it is, sometimes I think, oh, it's going to be simple. Once you get on the right path, then it's going to be just a straight shot. Well, no, it is a hard path. There's a lot of work that, needs to be undertaken. It is a dangerous path because the enemy doesn't want us on that path. So he will be looking for us. He will be seeking, he will be laying the snares on the path to pull us off. It is a crooked way. Now that might sound like, wait, but it's a crooked way in the sense, think about it, a straight path versus, if you're thinking especially, a mountainous path, it's a lot easier to get lost on a crooked path. I mean, even though it's the right path, it's still, you've got to be watchful. You can't be like, oh, la, 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 and then it says it is a lonely and a long. Lonely, not that, okay, in this case, you've got the 15 there, Gandalf, Bilbo, the 13 dwarves. But if you sort of translate it to modern day, if you're walking that correct path, the path that God says, I want you to walk on this path. It's going to be hard. It's going to be dangerous. It's going to be crooked. So you're going to be you got to be watching there. But there may not be a whole. Our Lord Himself said, the 2 roads. He says the road to hell. There's lots of people on that road. The road to heaven, there aren't as many. How many times in the culture you're like, well, is anybody out? No, everybody. Gosh, I feel like I'm just out in left field here. I feel so odd or so weird. Or sometimes people, I'm not gonna do a sermon on this, but sometimes when you say, I know I need to walk this is the path of truth. And people are like, and they just say, well, the heck with you then, and it is a long path. It's so we have to be ready for that long journey. It's, to me, this is one of those phrases that, as I was kind of preparing for this, I thought, oh, that's actually a good thing for me, and I think maybe, hopefully, for others, to reflect upon. So once again, I guess because this has been my MO on my points to ponder in this podcast. But so if you kind of look at just sort of the point to ponder on that, I would say, well, first of all, how realistic is my assessment of the call to holiness? How realistic am I? I'm like, well, this should be pretty straightforward. This should be fairly simple, I guess. I don't know. I think so. Well, no. It's a hard, dangerous, crooked, lonely, and long path. Okay. So how realistic is my assessment of the call to holiness? Am I on the right road? Have I found the right, road to the right path? I know sometimes people, we all struggle. But it's essential that we, okay, here it is. We got it. And then I would say that quote, I don't, it depends on what page, what version they're, so that's why we don't give any page numbers, because it's all kind of relative to the edition that you have. But I think that, it was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely and a long. I think it's a good thing to reflect upon. It might seem at first to be a bit dour, well, that sounds kind of like a downer, but it's that realistic assessment. And if, you do a lot of weightlifting, and obviously when whoever it was that kind of introduced you to that, they probably didn't say, this is gonna be simple, piece of cake, you might have to struggle sometimes. I mean, they say you're gonna have to put your back into this. Well, literally. You're gonna have to do you recognize the struggle, but you recognize there's a greater goal than just, people don't do what sports or whatever it may be. You don't do things just because I love to suffer. You do things but the goal, okay? Because the goal here is not just, I want to be on a hard, dangerous, crooked, lonely, and long path. No, there's a goal, but that's what you're going to have to experience, and you're going to have to be, in a sense, prepared for.
Yes. It would be fun to, when we get to, not to get too far ahead, but when we get later on in the podcast series to Mirkwood, we ought to hearken back to this initial kind of emphasis on the path and the road.
Yes.
Also the first quote that you brought up, Father, it's interesting to me that the Hobbit, make sure they took the right road to the right pass. Later on, as the audience will see, or if they've already read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, road is emphasized with capitalization. After the Hobbit, Tolkien says, pay attention.
The road.
Right.
The road. It's not just some random road, like, okay, you can go that. The road. Yes.
The road.
Absolutely. Exactly. Absolutely. And they're on the right road.
Yeah.
They find the right pass. They get they get what? Slapped around a little bit by the storm, and it's kind of, and I don't know, I'm not if I knew more, because I think Tolkien does the same thing with the company in the Lord of the Rings, where they're in the mountains with this crazy storm, and you think, wait, is this just a storm? Are there like these giants?
Yeah.
And I think it is really well woven that, wait, I think it's a storm? Well, no, are there giants? It's not what? I don't know. It's not so. This isn't really a point that I want to make, but it's
I
kind
see
of an
what you're saying.
observation.
Well, you're right. It's neat because we think about this is kind of from Frodo's perspective.
Yeah.
This is out of the Shire for the first time. I mean, to even get to Rivendell is pretty wild.
Oh yeah.
But then you go and just like you're a little hobbit from a quaint little hobbit hole. Yeah. You are seeing the most mind-boggling, terrifying storm. I love too how Tolkien's always, the journey is not pretty. To your point, it's like it's always raining. It's terrible thunderstorms. The dwarves are supposed to be really good at making fires. They're struggling to do like that. It's like poor Bilbo must be looking at goodness gracious.
Well, and there are a number of times where he just said, I wish I was back in the Shire. But so they find sort of refuge in that little cave. When I thought, once again, don't know if this is intended by Tolkien, but when I was looking at this, it sort of struck me. They're in the cave, and totally understandable that they're going to sort of use the modern phrase, decompress a little bit. So they make the blankets comfortable. They're getting their pipes out. Blowing smoke rings. I guess what clued me in, I thought they're starting to talk about, hey, what am I going to do when I get my share of the gold? And thinking, wow, you're kind of a little bit far ahead of yourself. And then it says they drop off to sleep one by one. Yeah. Now, there's 15 of them there. I would have, and I don't know. I think at other points, I don't think maybe up to this point, I don't know if there were other points, because I mean, is it Balin? I don't know how you pronounce it. That sometimes is the watchman.
Yeah, true.
You think, why didn't they set a watch? I mean, there's enough of them that they could have easily, 2 on and 13 sleeping. I mean,
You think after the troll encounter, maybe that would be a good time to set up a watch.
and the fact that they're like, well, as Gandalf says, caves are very rarely inhabited, and they checked it out, but it's just odd that they don't set a watch. And then if the readers have come to this point, you're like, well, I can see why maybe Father said they should always set a watch, because as it turns out, they're on the front porch of the goblins. It's not, if you think, let's see, can we pull this prank? Well, maybe we'll go to the side door. We'll be less obvious. Let's just go to the front porch. So they had no idea. They're on the front porch. They're all in a sort of this false sense of security. And then if the trolls was a bad situation that almost ended it, this is way worse. And I'm sure you can, this is where I think, once again, we're not hitting all the points by any means. I think it's a particularly beautiful reality, which I'm not really going to go into, that who's the one who kind of saves the day, doesn't save it from where it eventually went, at least for a short period of time, but it was Bilbo. And you could say, wait, is there anything providential, or was he just lucky he was having kind of this bad dream, sort of almost in and out? But the fact that, the crack opens at the back and everybody's snatched other than Gandalf, you're like, oh, this is bad. And so from that standpoint, once again, kind of looking in the mirror, saying, well, there's no security, there's no watchfulness. They've allowed themselves to be overcome by that false sense of security. I personally, and as a priest, I've done it before in my life, and I've seen it done before in others' lives, where they say, oh, well, you know what, I used to struggle with this, but it's kind of like, that tree's been cut down. And we've all seen trees that there's a stump, and you're like, well, it looks like a pretty dead tree to me. And then you're like, wait a second, there's a shoot, there's a sprout,
right? It's
still alive. And where our Lord says, watch, be watchful, And so I think, and once again, Tolkien is not trying to do some, systematic layout of the spiritual life. And I'm not even saying that Tolkien is writing this section with the intent for the audience to say, why were they watching them? I don't know, but as I gaze into the mirror, and I would imagine maybe others as well, to think, okay, what areas of my life, because they're in hindsight, you think, holy cow, you couldn't have picked a worse spot. I don't think you could have possibly, in that situation, picked anything worse. So we, look, so this is more sort of that point for pondering, what areas of my life am I in spiritual danger? What areas of my life am I on sort of the goblin's front porch and I didn't even realize it, And how is God calling me to greater watchfulness from that standpoint? It's a pretty, powerful, event, or not more an event, or a part of the story. And when I think of it, because I look at my own life and see some areas, maybe some some trees, if you will, that have been cut. But I'm not so sure if that stump is really dead. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it's probably not dead, but because I'm like, oh, that's good enough for right now. I'll go and focus on over here, and I'm thinking, oh, you fool. Maybe I shouldn't calling myself a fool, no one else a fool. But I'm thinking, oh, you fool, you really need to be not like focus on that steering at it the entire time. That's all I ever look at, but to be vigilant. To be vigilant, yeah. So, but this leads to, and honestly, it's interesting because when we were talking about doing these two chapters together, and I had some ideas for chapter 3. Chapter 4, I don't know. I'm not really sure. But I tell you what, my last point here is almost, it's going to go down as one of my favorite points for the book.
I'm excited to hear that. Let's see.
Just because, once again, it comes back to the hope. And I need hope as much as anybody else does, and I think we all do. So, when they are, obviously we're not going to recap the entire story, but, it looks not just bad. I mean, like I said, if the trolls look bad, this is 1,000 times worse. This is, I don't think you're getting out of this one. And they don't even know where Gandalf is at this point.
Bad situation.
I mean, granted, they didn't know where Gandalf was before, but now they're locked in a mountain.
With goblins.
With goblins.
Not a good time.
Not
a good time.
Not a good time.
You want to avoid that.
At all costs.
Yes.
So, all of a sudden, as the story kind of goes forward, there's this, the great goblin, lunges for Thorin, and Gandalf just sends off this pyrotechnic kind of almost like this incendiary bomb that goes off, and they run. They're moving, okay? And at one point when they have left the goblins somewhat behind, they've at least they've got some a head start on them. And Gandalf is just slicing through the goblin chains through the sword that he has, not magical sword, but that elven sword.
Yes.
So he says, and I just think this is a beautiful phrase, or couple sentences here. Well, it might be worse. And then again, it might be a good deal better. No ponies, and no food, and no knowing quite where we are, and hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go.
On we go.
I love that because you think it's an accurate assessment. It's not just, well, it could be bad. It could be better. It could be worse. It is bad. It might be worse, but it could be a great deal better. So in other words, that we're in a bad situation. We have no means of transportation. We have no food to sustain ourselves. We don't even know where the heck we are. And rather than just, I don't know, what would be almost what you would think would be the next, wow, we are in deep water. Well, let's just try to make a go of it. He just says, on we go. Maybe I'm a bit of a geek here, but I just think that there is such because let's face it, how many times in life are we just like, man, here's the liabilities, here's what we're up against. Yeah, we got some assets, but man, this is not looking good. And how tempting it is to fall prey to almost like a paralysis of where we just say, I don't know what to do. Or sometimes worse yet, our culture will, Satan culture or whatever you want to, will say, oh, well, hey, just do this.
Sure.
Whether, and then that sort of, which would make it unknowingly maybe 10 times worse. But there's that sense of, you know what? we're on the road. Let's go forward. You know, and it's not just what, it's not Pickett's charge. It's not just let's go. And you know you're walking into almost assured destruction. There's this sense of on we go, it's the journey continues. It's not a denial of the danger that they're in, but I would say it's a recognition that we're still in God's providence. So God's still the master. Now, granted, I'm putting Catholic words into Tolkien, but I think so. I really think not only should we kind of reflect and think, well, when things get difficult for me, do I sometimes fall prey to just almost a paralysis of just where we kind of shut down? We're like, I don't know what to do. And I think this little quote, it's a good thing to spend some time pondering it, and not just when the walls collapse, but I think even before, when I think things are going kind of pretty good in my life right now. Excellent time to ponder it, because I think when we ponder things, not that we shouldn't ponder, when walls collapse, this would be a good thing to ponder, but if it's the first time we're pondering it, I think it would have been better to ponder it before, kind of build. It's like, if the first time, use a dumb weightlifting analogy, I can't lift any weights, so
we haven't been to the gym. We got to test out your maxes here.
Oh my gosh! Can you? It's only 5 pounds, Father.
Oh, no.
You're struggling. Well, let's see if we can find. See that pencil over there? But it's not like you are going to start, a deadlift at 300 pounds when you've never done it before.
Right.
I don't think that's if you have to, I guess, maybe something good will come out of it. I mean, it's not a perfect analogy, but this is where I think we don't want to, when the walls come tumbling down, I don't think we want at that point to think, what did Father say? Okay. I mean,
to be prepared. I see
what
you mean.
Yes. I mean, you can only, your amount, you just said something to somebody recently today about deadlift, I wouldn't even know anything about it. But I mean, you've built yourself up to that. Mm-hmm. You didn't start there. You probably didn't even start even close to that. Right. So it's over time that you build up. Spiritual life, same thing. Absolutely the same thing is, you've got to build this sort of spiritual muscle up so that when the more traumatic, we're usually not at our best when the walls fall in. We're not, I'm totally calm, cool, collected.
Mm-hmm.
We're and the adrenaline, the whole thing, and the enemy is usually breathing down our neck really at that point. So it's not the best time to be like, I think I'm going to start reflecting upon this.
Right. So, preemptive. Be preemptive. Start.
Absolutely.
Real quick, my memory's not serving me. At the end of Mass, the deacon or the priest will say, "Go forth," and there's something that follows.
Actually, in the Latin, "Ite Missa Est," which, that is actually a really interesting perspective, which I never really, because at the end of Mass, and there are some other sort of versions of this, but the traditional, let's just say for most of the Roman Rite, "Ite Missa Est," basically "Ite," go, sort of in the sense you've been, go. Missa Est, sort of you've been sent. You're going forth. You've been sent. It's being sent. And it literally, I think it means go. It has been sent. There's that sense of you're being sent on the mission. But actually, that's a very interesting perspective, because that and I'm not saying that Tolkien was thinking of this, but that notion of on we go, it perfectly aligns itself to that "Ite Missa Est." go, you or it has been sent.
Right.
It's that sense of, because you're being sent back into the world, into that danger and everything.
To correlate, to circle back to Rivendell, a place you go for rest, to be enriched. It would be very tempting just to say, gosh, I feel great here.
Well, exactly. Mountain of Transfiguration. Peter's like,
Right.
hey, can we just hang out here?
Hang out here.
I mean, this is pretty good.
It's like, no, you can't. It's
yeah.
you have to.
Absolutely.
It's the natural step after that enrichment of the soul, is to go out and subject yourself to the hardships which you must encounter and overcome on your journey.
Absolutely. So on we go. Absolutely.
On we go, Father.
No, that's awesome. I love that.
Thank you, sir.
So wonderful. Well, I think our next installment is a big one, and I don't know where this is going to hit in the Christmas kind of lineup. I don't know where, if people. I know people are exceptionally busy, but
This will be around Christmas time, wouldn't it?
probably will be. So maybe that will work out really well. Because anyway, here we are.
Because they're coveting their presents, perhaps? Coveting the ring? You're going to need this episode in your life.
By golly, you'll need it big time.
You think it'll be a two-parter next time we get together, perhaps?
You know what? It could be. It could be, because there's a lot going on here.
I agree.
Stay tuned.
Until then.
God bless you.
Definitely.